Welcome to the Sage Verse, with real works and true words. Patterns of recognition leave your brain converged. Time is irrelevant when the thoughts of impediment corrupt your soul with mind-numbing nemesis. The sage's way is where the truth hits the page. Turn your soul into a library in the name of knowledge and discovery. We seek out reality to be gone of human apathy. Welcome to the Sage Verse, where we explore the pressing questions of our age. My name's Jason, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine and fellow founder of the channel, Hermes. How are we doing today, brother?
Very well, thank you, Jason. This is the Sage's Way podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. So, it's your subject today. What topic are we going to be discussing?
So I thought it'd be an interesting discussion to talk about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So, yeah, I'll get you to give your initial reactions first, and then I'll kind of go into it as well.
Okay, yeah, interesting one. Yeah, I mean, we don't often think about the differences between those two. But for me, I suppose my immediate reaction would be wisdom is kind of applied knowledge, or, you could go and say that wisdom is almost insight in some sense, in that, where knowledge is the ability to know a lot of information, understand facts and things like this, wisdom is really kind of like when to use that knowledge, when to speak, or how to apply that knowledge at the right time, or beyond that as well, in terms of insight, is, what does your experience tell you when you've used that knowledge? And I would say that just off the top of the bat there, that's kind of, for me, what marks the difference there. I'm sure, we'll dig deeper into that, but that's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
Yeah. So basically said it there. So wisdom is knowledge applied. So I saw a little quote. I'm not sure it's by, but I've seen it around for a little while. It kind of paints a really nice idea of how that works. So knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So yeah, knowledge is essentially the mental aspect of understanding, and wisdom is when you apply that knowledge to a practical level. So to an extent, you could read for years and years and years about how to swim. But if you jump into a swimming pool with no prior training, no experience in swimming in a swimming pool, you're not going to know how to swim. So wisdom is gained through experience. So I guess we often talk about the sage here. The sage is someone who has acquired that wisdom through kind of a long lifetime of self-cultivation and practice. The scholar, I would say, is someone that has mastered the mental aspect, the understanding, the knowledge, but I guess to an extent, not so much the wisdom or the practicality or the ability to use that wisdom. So I find it interesting that in most education systems, our one for sure in the UK, it was mainly about knowledge and testing knowledge and regurgitating knowledge. We're taught by our teachers in exams and things like that, but very little. Maybe in primary school a little bit when they got you to make plants or showed you how gravity works, but especially in the kind of older years, it is mainly knowledge rather than kind of wisdom and experience you're gaining in that initial kind of few years of education.
Yeah, I suppose wisdom is one of those things that it's hard to teach, because it's almost like you are your own teacher in that regard, because no one can practice knowledge for you. It can only be self-practiced and self-realized in some regard. So yeah, I was just thinking there for a second. So if we look at wisdom, I think we could say that in order to be wise, you need to have knowledge and then be able to practice that knowledge and apply it in the right way. Whereas you can be knowledgeable and still lack wisdom. In that intelligence, without wisdom, can exist in the sense that you have an intelligent person, they're able to know a lot of information. They read a book, maybe a list of recipes, and now they know the recipe to cook that dish or whatever, right? But I suppose with wisdom, you can't be wise and not know something. I think that wisdom has to have knowledge at the same time.
Hmm.
I don't think you can be wise without knowledge.
Hmm. No, I agree 100%.
Yeah, but whereas you can know a lot and not be wise, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I thought I'd just make that distinction there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think wisdom is the combination of, yeah, knowledge, understanding, and practice. So yeah, it has the
Yeah.
knowledge component in it, but knowledge doesn't necessarily have the wisdom component in it. Even if you're reading kind of philosophical books and things like that. Like in my younger years, I was always very interested in philosophy, but yeah, when I would read certain things, my understanding only took me so far. And then when I kind of experienced something, that's when it kind of really clicked. You know, that's when the wisdom kind of kicked in. It's when I had that experience for myself. For example,
You're
um,
deriving insight.
deriving
So yeah,
insight
you're
through
deriving insight.
experience. Yeah. So, for example, like every child, I'm sure, was told at a young age not to touch the fire. You know, their curiosity, obviously bubbled up, and I think eventually most of us got burned at some point. But you can tell your child as much as you
Yep.
like, that fire is hot, it's going to hurt you, it's painful, and this and
Fuck
that.
around and find
But
out.
until you fuck around and find out, you're not going to know what that feels like. You're not going to know, damn, I'm not going to do that again. That hurt. So makes it kind of interesting, and it makes me think about how we're governed, and also you could say raised by our parents. When there's more of a discipline, I'd say, in an authoritarian rule by both parents, by both governments and society, things like that, it's usually about follow our way of life, follow our rules that we set out for you. One of which, like I said,
Mm.
the fire, do not touch the fire, do not take drugs, do not, there's, how it goes. There's loads of things
Almost
like that.
inhibitors of wisdom in
Exactly,
some
that
sense.
those are inhibitors of wisdom because through mistakes, and I'd like to thank my parents myself because they actually allowed me to make mistakes at a young age. They weren't very strict.
Yep.
A lot of other parents like saw me acting out a lot and like being quite a rebellious child, and they thought I should have kind of stricter parents, stricter. But I think I've got to the level I'm at now is based on how I was raised at a young age. Always kind of pushed the boundaries and wanted to experience things for myself, and I think that is really so important. It's important in society. It's important when you're raising your children, I believe, because yeah, if you're just getting them to follow kind of a code of law in line with what you think
Mm.
is correct, they're not learning that for themselves. They're not gaining the insight and wisdom themselves. They're just kind of following a path that's been laid out for them. So, like you said, it is an inhibitor of wisdom. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree in that we should allow young children to mess up a few times in order to understand where the boundaries lie between failure and success.
Hmm.
Because if you're not putting yourself out there in discomfort and taking risks, then how do you know what that risk is? Some people need to fully understand what a risk is rather than just comprehending it or thinking about it. And like you say, curiosity does kill the cat.
Hmm.
I mean, it was just bringing that quote that Socrates put forward, which is risk taking accompanied by intelligence gains a profit, accompanied by folly leads to harm to oneself or others.
Mm.
Now, it's interesting that he uses the word intelligence there because you could say that, in some sense, it's wisdom. Risk taking accompanied by wisdom or prudence um, arguably leads to a more calculated or strategic way of taking a risk
Hmm.
so that you can limit failure.
Hmm.
And I suppose that in the early stages of life, you're more likely to take risks and fail because this is an integral process.
Hmm.
And another thing that I was thinking about was that it seems natural, at least, and I think in our conventional understanding of wisdom, is that it's a temporal thing. Because in nature, you're taking risks and you're learning. There is a gradual evolution to it. So in some sense, it's built into the fabric of nature. But is it a temporal thing or is it based off the number of experiences one has?
Hmm.
I think that it's a combination of the two because in some sense, those who are perhaps older but lack the experience of not having done many things, well, how could we say they are wise without having actually danced with the devil or jumped in the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, it's not just a temporal thing. Whereas someone who's a young child, perhaps, who is doing lots of different things, but still doesn't have the age or the necessary mental faculties to process failure in the right way, because you could make a series of mistakes continually until you actually learn. And what is the where do we draw the line as to when we learn? Well, you would think that when you mature and when you grow up. So as a child, maybe there is a reason to having some limitation at a young age and making risks, because it's hard to maybe process failure at a young age and really understand that I shouldn't do this again, right?
Yeah.
Are our mental faculties developed at that point to be able to self-reflect and say, well, I shouldn't do that again? Because you could form negative habits. You could go down the line of havoc and be, a young social offender or something like this if you're, naturally risk-oriented. So there is a balance between the number of risks you should take and the age that you are and your level of development mentally, I think. So,
No,
I mean, it's a tough one. We can debate about when that is.
I think greatness is on the other side of failure. And I think a lot of people do have this fear of failure, myself included. It takes me back to when we were in China, studying Kung Fu. I remember in my school in particular, every Wednesday, they would make us perform the kind of Kung Fu forms we've been learning in front of the master, in front of various guests he would invite. I remember the first time I had to do this, he invited, must have been close to 50 people in the army, news people. And when I first went to China, I had a lot of social anxiety. I had massive fear of failure. And I was, doing these forms, and a form I was practicing for a whole month that I could do the back of my hand by myself. When I was being viewed by others, it was a completely different experience, because sometimes we view ourselves through their eyes. We're realizing that we're being seen, so it kind of changes something in our mind. And I remember the first time I kind of failed miserably, kind of walked away, didn't end up doing it. And I understood in the end the reason they had this performance element of it is because in Taoism, it's all about maintaining present. It's about maintaining in a non-dual state. A dual state is watching yourself kind of in the third person. It's about, being fully present, fully in the moment. Because if I can do that by myself, why can't I do that in front of other people? So with weekly practice, I ended up cultivating that, and by the end I was really good at performing. I've actually performed Tai Chi now in front of groups of 50 to 100 people. I teach Tai Chi now. I would have never been able to do that without that kind of element, that fear. And I did fail, I think 2-3 times. I ended up kind of just walking off stage because I had forgot what I was practicing.
I've got a question for you then. As experience and hindsight is 2020, and it's the greatest teacher and whatnot. Seneca, there's that famous quote where he says that we suffer more in imagination than reality. I wonder if now, having gone through that experience, were those thoughts that you were having, that social anxiety before the build-up, were they just almost like parasites of the mind, or things that were irrational by definition?
It's definitely the mind.
Sense to them. Obviously, you were new at this point before performing, right? So perhaps there is some degree of reason why you should be nervous.
Well, I'm someone that's a perfectionist. I like to present myself very well. Everything I do, I want to be my best work. And when you're new at something, to an extent, you almost, sometimes people, to avoid failure, they avoid trying, and they actually prevent themselves from self-cultivating and growing and becoming masters at things. It's definitely because I've always been an overthinker. It's definitely it's something I had to overcome. Overthinking is you are torturing the mind. Basically, I think Lao Tzu said when you live in the past, you are depressed. You're stuck in past trauma and past things that happened to you. When you live in the future, you are anxious. You're preparing for failure, you're worried about failure,
or you're focused on this perfect image, or this perfectionistic.
Exactly, you're trying to compare yourself to this when it's not. You're not living in the present. You're not living in the past. You're living in the present. And he said, when you're in the present, you're at peace. There's another quote I've heard. I am not my past, my name is not I was. I am not my future, my name is not I'll be. I am my present, my name is I am. So I think that was the teaching. That is the way of mastering it. Being in the I am, being fully present. It's reminding me of tarot cards. I don't know if you've ever used tarot cards before, but the first
Yeah,
card
I've
is.
never dabbled, but
Mm.
I'm familiar with
There's a
what they are.
lot
Yeah.
of wisdom and with the different cards and different understandings. But the number zero, the card zero, is called the Fool, and usually it's an image of kind of a very carefree, playful figure that's about to looking in the sky, and he's about to step off a mountain. Like, he doesn't realize, but it's because he's just so carefree, so worry free.
Well,
Yeah, that he's doing that. And usually the teaching in the card is to integrate the teaching of the Fool, because any practice you begin to self-cultivate, you start as a fool. That's why it's the number zero. Like, if you want to become an artist, you have to start by doing crappy drawings. If you want to become a podcast, you have to start by making crappy videos. So I'd like to think we've got past that stage now. But yeah, no matter what you do, you're going to start as a beginner, and people are scared to be the beginner. People are scared to be the fool. But the sage, the master, always started at the fool. There absolutely is.
Because that naivety and that pure innocence, or ignorance is bliss in some sense, is that sometimes being a fool removes that fear of failure.
It does.
Because you're not conscious, nor are you self-aware of your mediocrity in some sense, right? Whereas if you're, too cerebral, and you're focused on the future, and perhaps you're so aware of your own faults, that can be a hindrance to living in the moment at that time, regardless of what your skill might be.
Absolutely.
Right. But just to draw on what you said there about, being fully present. Now, I would say that, so you've got benefits of the past in that it's a repository of failure or success. In other words, information to learn from. And then there is positives of the future in that you need a vision, you need a purpose, you need a goal in which to focus on. But then you also need to be rooted and grounded in reality, which is very much so the present. So somewhere it lies in the middle. Is that the present, right? Is that what it is? Or
I think there's
just
a time
being
and
in
a
the
place.
present removes you from the past and the future.
Yeah.
So there has to be a combination.
There is
flow between the spectrum.
But I think that comes with practice, and there's a time and a place. When I was performing, for example, that the time and place then is to be present, because I'm practicing something, and
yeah, for sure.
So I would say, for example, if you are being negatively affected by the past, like Lao Tzu said, when you're too engulfed in the past, you're depressed. I'd say the practice of the past is, for example, going back to the past, like realizing your lessons, doing work with the past. If you've had negative experiences, like going back to the past to deal with trauma, working with therapists, that's one way you can work with the past, to integrate it into your present. You don't need to be in the past to learn from the things of the past. And same with the future. There's things like visualization. There's people make vision boards of what they'd like to achieve. They make goals, but when you're trying to achieve those goals, you have to be present. But you're making the steps towards the future. So it's an intricate art, but you've got to play with the present, play with the past, but remain in the present. Sorry. Play with the past and the future, but remain in the present.
Perhaps there's a wisdom to it, when to apply being in the present, being in the future, and being in the past. Arguably, when you are performing, you 100% want to be in the present. In fact, if you look at skateboarders or extreme sport individuals, they have to be in the present. There is no room for hesitation.
Absolutely.
Or fall, right? There is absolutely no room, because failure for them is, the cost of failure is so high, injury or death, that they can't afford to be thinking about what they're going to do. They have to fully, immerse their body and mind, so that if they say do a kickflip or do something, more outrageous than that, they're able to do it because they've got the skill and they've got the knowledge, and they know how to apply that in the moment.
Yeah.
So again, being physically grounded when times call for that is 100% important. And again, getting out of your head is a difficult thing to do. And, confidence can help in that. And yeah, maybe that's less of a wisdom thing and more of a
knowledge.
Just being solely present. Yeah, solely present, I would say.
Because
I
even
don't
if
know
we go back
is the
to
condition for that,
if we go back to the knowledge and the wisdom, usually knowledge, like the things you learn in school, are things we've got to up to this point. Or if it's in your own life, it's the knowledge you've acquired from looking back from things you've gone through to this point. Science has only taken us this far. Knowledge is the study of things that have taken us this far. It's usually the study of the past. And wisdom is usually the attempt to cultivate the future based on kind of goals and direction. And again, that has to be practiced in the present through applying that knowledge. Through experience and whatnot.
Yeah. Certainly. So yeah, knowledge is really just the study of information. It's very scholarly in some sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very difficult to teach wisdom out of school when it's self-realized and self-practiced. I think that the schooling years are, they serve their purpose as a tool to develop knowledge.
Yeah.
But and then at the age of 18, you have to go into the world and apply that knowledge. But I think that, it serves a benefit to be able to practice that knowledge throughout the years of schooling as well, so that by the time you reach to 18, you're not completely green and novice when it comes to applying what you've learned, because you may just be a bookworm or a book at that point and have no practical experience.
Literally, to what extent is this education system really, because you're essentially in it, and the years in which you're kind of sponging your environment to the most you will ever be in your life, like that's when you're most kind of receptive to information and kind of experience. And if you look at a classroom today versus a classroom 100 years ago, there's very little difference. It's tables and chairs with the teacher at the front, and it hasn't evolved that much. The current education system came in during the Industrial Revolution, and the way in which they generated that way of teaching was to kind of create people for the industry, like things like factories and stuff like that. They wanted essentially to give you information and you regurgitate it back. But to what extent is that?
And
go on.
Well, no. So in insight, when you apply that knowledge to real life and you gain some sense of insight, you quickly realize that what you're prepared for is not preparing you.
It isn't. Because
it isn't. You come out of school and that knowledge is not translatable to the real world.
A lot of it really isn't.
So and that is an insight. That is a derived wisdom, which then transforms your path onto something else.
Yeah, just to finish my point.
And you try and seek out new avenues.
Like I said, there's very little difference with a classroom back then versus a classroom today. But if you look at a car today versus a car 100 years ago, there's a massive kind of evolution that's kind of taken place. And I think the education system definitely needs kind of a level of evolution, especially kind of public schools. I know there's some alternative schools I've heard about. I don't know if you've heard of them. There's Steiner schools for one. There's an old philosopher, Rupert Steiner, who developed his own way of creating an education system, and they're pretty prevalent across the world. But they're more,
I know, classical schooling, which is
they're more apply this sort of method of gaining wisdom. It's more a practical school. Like if they're going to teach you about gravity, they're going to take you outside and throw things in the air. It's a lot more creative, and it's a lot more practical. It's something I've always kind of taken an interest in. I'm sure there's other examples of alternative forms of education as well. But again, I definitely stand behind the need of combining wisdom and knowledge, the practice of both of those things. And I think we can do a lot better as a society to kind of evolve our education system. I think it's definitely necessary.
Yeah, the education system could definitely benefit from more, dynamicism, if that's a word. It could be more dynamic, right? Rather than just sitting in front of a textbook and mindlessly trying to put words into your brain. I think that is dull, and especially for restless, creative, young children that have all these hormones that they just want to be buzzing around and kicking a ball outside. The last thing they want to do is sit down and listen to a boring teacher tell them about the history of the Roman Empire, right? Without actually showing them or
the quadratic equation. When have you ever used the quadratic equation since year 8?
Well, The thing is, I think maths is sick, but
I was always good at
I
maths.
didn't study at school. Yeah, I didn't study until the age of 16, actually.
Oh, okay.
Um, I just, yeah, I mean, I didn't do any homework or anything like that until the age of 16. Then I found out what I wanted to do, and then I decided to actually study,
Apply
and
yourself,
turned
yeah.
out I can actually study and get good grades. So, yeah, before that, I was a very, curious kid. I loved just going out and doing my own thing.
Hmm.
From a young age, that was mainly what I was doing, going out playing with friends and getting up to mischief, which I think, served me well in terms of street wisdom
Hmm.
and just giving me the self-confidence to be able to carry myself to places like China
Yeah,
as well,
definitely.
being able to expand out of my comfort zone, because in fact my comfort zone lies outside of the comfort zone. I hate stagnancy, dull scenarios, routine. I like to put myself in, a chaotic environment that challenges me and gives me new experiences to process information from.
Hmm.
If I'm not learning new things, I'm not acquiring new information, and I'm just stuck in a stagnant environment, just doing the same thing day in, day out. That's essentially living hell for me.
Hmm.
And I suppose, I've derived that from my own experiences, and you could say that that is a form of wisdom that I've taken from my own um, my own understanding of how I react to certain environments and what's best for me and what's best for myself. So, and that can only be drawn from putting yourself out and trying different things. When we say, "Oh, I don't know what to do with my life," well, the best thing to do is to try different things and see which
No,
sticks,
agreed,
right?
agreed.
And see what you love and become passionate about. And I guess you're acquiring knowledge in that process as well. And that is the knowledge that serves your insight and your understanding for the future, that you hope to put into practice.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely both have value, 100%. Like going back to that example of
Mm,
someone that obviously could read for years about how to swim, but until they jump in the pool, they're not going to know how to swim. But did that knowledge serve any purpose in that process? I think, of course, it does. It's like you said, it's a
mm,
wisdom is applied knowledge. Usually, if you're just completely blank and thrown in a pool, you're going to panic and scuttle around. But if you're going to say, if we give an example of someone that came out of school very early versus someone that went all the way through to university, there's probably like a
mm,
what 6 7 year difference there of experiencing life. So to an extent, when they're both at say the age 23 or 24, when the person's come out of university, the person that came out earlier has a lot more wisdom at that point because they've had a lot more experience in the real world, whereas the person that just came out has a lot more knowledge. And then
well,
if they are then to
yeah. I mean, it
apply,
also
I think knowledge is like a shortcut of, like you said, it's applied wisdom. Someone that jumped in the pool and had about 5 years practice just themselves randomly learning through experience versus someone that then has the knowledge and then they try to apply it themselves. They, I would say, have a shortcut to gaining wisdom. Would you agree with that?
yeah.
They
I
might learn
think that
faster.
knowledge can. Yeah, well, knowledge can be a springboard for wisdom.
Hmm.
I definitely think that without knowledge, wisdom can be harder to develop, and you'd have to fail much more before
Yeah,
you can,
agreed.
taste the fruits of success. So, in that sense, yeah, having a strong foundation of knowledge of which to build wisdom from can be certainly beneficial. But also, without knowledge, what is wisdom? What is experience without knowledge?
Hmm.
Because if you don't acquire knowledge and you're not educating yourself, then you don't have the tools, or you haven't sharpened your tools or sharpened your
Hmm.
your mental faculties to be able to process
Hmm.
experience, I think.
Yeah,
So, um, so how does that prepare you for the real world if you have no theory in some
yeah.
sense? Well, you may be well adapted in your learning from, you don't just have to learn from a textbook. A textbook is not the only medium that we can learn from. We can learn from life in general.
Mm.
Life is a massive textbook in which to learn
Teachers,
from.
other people
So,
that have experienced things.
yeah, exactly. So you don't necessarily. It's a different kind of wisdom. I think that there are certainly different kinds of wisdom for sure,
Hmm.
because there are certainly people who are very wise that don't have a traditional educational background,
Hmm.
and they possess a sense of wisdom almost derived from just life itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So yeah,
so again, the combination of study and practice is essentially what we're going for. So I think, again, everything exists within a spectrum. I think you want to be mastering the fool, like we said, and you want to be mastering the scholar. The combination of those two things, I think, is the creation of the sage. Sometimes someone might just be the scholar and they've excelled very far in being the scholar. Someone might come out of university with a PhD, for example, and think they know everything, and then they're not willing to become a fool. They're not willing to try anything. They're really scared of failure because they have this ego where they don't want to, be made to look stupid. Whereas someone that didn't go to that,
100%.
Yeah, then there's people that didn't study. Then there's people that didn't study at all that are actually really willing to be the fool, but because they don't really have that study of knowledge, they'll make a lot more mistakes and a lot more failure, but they're willing to do that. So again, I think it's a combination of the two. It's keeping your ego in check, doing the study, doing the work. I think knowledge is basically like a simulation. The mind is a simulation of the future. We can simulate the future from our mind, but then you have to go out and practice it,
Yeah, just to tie up here, with what you said about cultivating the fool, it just reminded me of one of the things my previous employer said, which was, there are no stupid questions, right? There are no stupid questions. So curiosity is not stupid, even if it fails time and time again. It is not stupid because it is the urge, the desire to innovate and learn. Mm-hmm. So there are no stupid questions, and I think that symbolizes the fool. And you could say that statement in itself is a wise statement, because it's processing the fact that there are no stupid questions, because that is the desire to learn, right? So
yeah, I think again, that's a really good point. Going back to the things existing on a spectrum in the middle, I say that where the fool or going too far on the fool side could be an issue is they sometimes reject study and would rather just the making of mistakes to learn. And sometimes the scholar thinks it's all the study, and they would have a rejection of practice in order to learn, because they're scared of being the fool. They're scared of making the mistakes. So, I would say when I mentioned my personal experience in China, I would say I did come out of university. I was, very much all mind. I did realize actually to this, level, I haven't really experienced much life, and I was terrified of failure. I was terrified to make a mistake, but that's the route to becoming the sage. That's the route to greatness, is through making mistakes, through practicing what you're studying. So yeah, I would definitely say to the viewers, don't be scared to make mistakes. Definitely study things. Knowledge is your friend, and yeah, through the combination of those two things, the combination of the scholar and the fool, you're going to become the sage. That is the route to becoming the sage. Consistent practice, consistent gaining of wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Those three things are very important.
Yeah, and self-reflection, and just to add on to that last point you mentioned about the scholar being detached from the real world. You don't just want to be stuck in the books and all theoretical and cerebral and have all this knowledge, when that knowledge may be obsolete if it doesn't translate to what the real world is inferring, right? Which can be the case. So
yeah, no, a lot of people are just all knowledge. They're just all kind of facts and information. You'll talk to some people sometimes, they'll give you a whole lecture on their understanding of the world, but how are you using it? What are you doing with this understanding, this way you see the world? What is your contribution to either changing it or bettering it, or what are you doing? And I think that's the component a lot of people kind of lack. I think in this life, we're not really prepped towards wisdom and prepped towards becoming the sage. Like I've mentioned previously, you go to school, then get a job, and focus on TV,
eudaimonia.
Celebrities. Yeah, eudaimonia, absolutely. We need that experience. If you're really going to be a world changer, which many people want to be, you're going to have to really have your own applied knowledge. You're going to have to gain your own wisdom. You're going to have to add your own component to this world. Everything in this world is starting from someone's mind. Like this cup started as an idea in someone's
Yeah,
mind.
everyone adds their shade of color.
Every product,
For sure.
everything you see around you started within someone's mind. That's where knowledge plays. It's the mental aspect. It's the simulation of reality. And if you then practice and draw it out of your mind, you can create anything. Everything we see around us was
100%.
existed once in someone's mind.
And yeah, and I think that leads us on to our next discussion, which we'll be talking about the nature of creativity. So yeah, I think that we'll wrap up here. But I'd just like to say, like, if the viewers have any suggestions for videos, please leave them in the comment section below. Hermes, you have anything you wanna mention last to the followers?
Just thank you for everyone that's listening. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy our content, I often look at the analytics of our stuff. It seems we've got a lot of silent watchers. 75% of our watchers are not subscribed. So don't be scared to hit that subscribe button. Get involved with the Sage's Way, the path to becoming the Sage. We want you involved. We want you talking. Write comments like Jason said. Give us ideas to talk about. We'll definitely message back and write back. And so just like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.
Peace.
Welcome to the Sageverse. Please just observe the birth of this creative surge for the purpose to leave hatred purged and replaced with words that will make you learn to take your place on earth. And once you've taken your place and found your greatest of traits, cultivated the day, this will be making you say, this is the Sage's way.